Welcome everyone to E8 Security's Bright Talk channel. We're very excited for you to join us today. We have a great webinar in store. It's Improving Security Operations with Security Analytics. Joining me today is Ravi Devareddy, our co-founder and CTO here at E8 Security. I'm Samantha Madrid. I'm your host today. Welcome, Ravi.
Thank you, Samantha. Good morning.
Also, our very, very special guest joining and co-presenter today is Joseph Blankenship. Joseph is a senior analyst with Forrester Research and is the premier analyst for security analytics. Welcome, Joseph. We're very, very excited to have you join us today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So everyone who's dialed in today, this is a two-part webinar. The first part will be Joseph going through security analytics from a market perspective, and then it will go over to Ravi, who will finish the webinar talking about the product side and how to think about security analytics as it pertains to improving security operations. At the end, we'll hold questions, so please use the chat window, and we will do live question and answers. We also invite you to share this webinar with your colleagues. It will be available immediately following in on-demand mode. So with that, I will hand it over to Joseph. Joseph, take it away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the warm introduction. As Samantha said, I am Joseph Blankenship, Senior Analyst with Forrester Research. We're going to talk a little bit about improving security operations using security analytics and introducing some of the concepts around security analytics and how this differs from some of the technology that you may currently be deploying in your environment, and sort of how does better visibility and decision-making and workflow associated with employing security analytics tools, how does that actually help to improve operations for security teams and in security operations centers? This is one of my favorite scenes from the movie Airplane 2. If you've not had the opportunity to see Airplane 2, I definitely recommend it. Just an excellent sequel to the movie Airplane, one of my all-time favorites. But there's this great scene where William Shatner is standing in this mission control center going completely crazy because all these machines are beeping and blinking and alerting behind him. And our current security environment sort of reminds me of that scene in a lot of ways. Not that, we're all Bill Shatner standing in mission control centers, but we're overwhelmed by the number of alerts and the amount of information that is coming in to our security teams. And over time, our way of addressing this is to layer on more and more security tools that send us more telemetry that we have to address. So every time we add something new, now we've got to go and address that. We've got more alerts we've got to deal with, and we have not really, in all cases, matured the processes and matured the tools that we use to examine those alerts, determine what's real, what's not real, and then figure out how do we quickly and efficiently remediate these things. So to reduce that frustration, we need better decision making. We need tools that look at that telemetry, that look at what's happening in our networks, looking at what happens on our endpoints, looks at our user behavior to figure out are we seeing something malicious? Are we seeing something here that we need to respond to? And then help us make better decisions about what we're seeing so that we can more quickly respond. And that's one of the things that we get with security analytics tools. We get that increased visibility. We get deeper security context as we're not just looking at an IDS alert, or we're not just looking at an endpoint malware detection alert. We're combining these things together to give us a more contextualized view. And security analytics tools, by and large, are also coming with enriched workflow so that we're not struggling with how do we investigate these and how do we track our case notes and how do we pass this along to the next person in the process. So you may be saying to yourself, what does he mean by security analytics? I don't really understand what that means. This is a simple graphic that we included in a couple of our Forrester research reports earlier this year sort of outlining where security analytics sits in terms of other technologies. So you can see here that security analytics is sort of a layer that's looking at what kind of a threat intelligence feeds do we have, or what kind of intelligence do we have built into a technology. Perhaps we're using a SIM as a log collector and aggregation point, and we're layering analytics on top of it there. We also look at feeds from things like user behavior analytics or security user behavior analytics, the green box there on the left, as well as network analysis and visibility tools that look at net flow inside of a network, threat intel feeds, as we discussed, and even DLP tools from the standpoint of user behavior and how are they interacting with data, is data being exfiltrated. So kind of bubbling all of these things up, if you will, and then using robust technologies to help make better decisions about what we're seeing from all of these different tools and seeing them all in one place as opposed to multiple places. Now, how did we get to security analytics? Well, of course, we started many years ago with the SIM. And initially, we used the SIM as a log collector and for perimeter defense. So, typically, a deployment only looked at things like IDS alerts, perhaps firewall rule alerts, and those types of things. Then over time, we looked at the SIM and said, hey, we're aggregating all these logs, and now we've got a requirement coming to us from a compliance standpoint, like PCI DSS or any of the others, that says, hey, you've got to monitor logs. You've got to monitor what's going on in your environment. And not only do you need to monitor it, you need to archive that information and retain it in case we need to start an investigation. So that sort of started the compliance era, if you will, of security analytics or SIM. And as you can see, as we go up this chart here, we went from thousands or hundreds of events per second all the way up kind of on the right-hand side to where we're over 100,000 events per second. So we're looking at change in how we, in the level of detail that we need to get from security data, as well as changes, vast changes, honestly, in the volume and velocity of the data that we're taking in. So one of the things we realized over time is continuing with only a rules-based approach with SIM, where we wrote correlation rules that tried to bring all these things together and give us context or help us to decide what's real and what's not. That was not really scalable in an environment where we're taking in hundreds of thousands of events per second. And then we needed to add an analytic layer on top of it, and that's kind of where we are today, where analytics can exist either in conjunction with a SIM, built on top of that infrastructure, or even as a standalone or adjacent to SIM. And this is our Forrester definition of security analytics as defined in several reports that we've done. And this has been tweaked and changed a little bit over time to kind of reflect changes in infrastructure, changes in technology. But it's basically a platform based on a big data infrastructure that includes feeds from SIM systems, different security solutions, net flow data, external threat intelligence, even internal threat intelligence, even things like vulnerability data, endpoint application data, and then using technologies like machine learning or artificial intelligence, if you will, to help provide real-time monitoring and facilitate faster response and faster remediation to security incidents. And our primary purpose of what we're trying to do is gain better visibility. One of the frequent inquiries that I get is, how do I get better visibility to all of these things that I've got? And typically we're talking to security professionals that could have 20 and even 30 different security technologies deployed, someplace in their environment, and they're trying to figure out, how do I aggregate all of these things so we get a consistent view? And one of the ways to do that is with a security analytics tool. And that's because they collect and analyze all that disparate data coming in from all of those different systems, and gives us one place where we can go and look at those alerts, and then dig down into those alerts to figure out what are they telling us. So not only for real-time alerting, but also for doing our investigations. This is a way to start our investigation and do our active threat hunting. What is the tool telling us can we go and do a little more deeper digging on this event that we've seen or this alert that we've gotten. Key characteristics of security analytics platforms. There's a lot of text here, so I definitely won't read this all to you, but we'll just point out a few things. So a couple of the things that we look for in security analytics platforms is how fast can the platform analyze data. Remember, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of events per second. So are we able to actually look at that data at that rate and then give some sort of real-time alerting? Also, the amount of data, looking at all these different device types, as we saw in the previous slide, we're bringing in a lot of data from different places and trying to analyze it. Then the event correlation process. Are we able to give a contextualized view of an alert? So when an analyst goes and looks at the alert, you've got all of the data needed to make a decision there in front of the analyst. So making sure that we're providing good security context so we can go forth and actually do something with the data. That's one of the real struggles we've got with some of our current security solutions, is actually being able to do something useful with the data that we're given, especially at the rate and speed that we're getting. So a couple of last things I'll point out here: workflows. Look for built-in workflows. How can the analytics platform help the analyst, figure out what to do with the alert and what are the next steps required? Are there, good workflow tools and good investigative tools included in the platform? And then visualization. Am I able to look into the platform and then visualize what this alert is telling me, how machines are interacting, where the alert is coming from? When we're looking at user behavior, what devices is the user interacting with, and what devices does the user have access to? So good visualization tools to help us understand the nature of the alert or the attack so we can more quickly make good security decisions. So some considerations for anyone considering a security analytics platform. First, what are your monitoring requirements? What does your environment look like? Do you have dispersed applications? Are you mostly cloud-based? If you've got applications and data in the cloud, obviously you need a cloud, a solution that's going to help you monitor access to and from that data, as well as the environment itself. Any compliance needs that you have. One of the most robust, if not the most robust, requirement around analytics and logs and et cetera and monitoring is obviously the PCI, payment card industry data security standard. Requirement 10 is fairly prescriptive in the way that it asks for people to monitor their environment and then retain logs. So if you've got compliance requirements, whether it's PCI or otherwise, consider what do you need to do from a compliance standpoint as you're deploying a security analytics platform. What threat intelligence sources do you need? Are you subscribed to anything? Make sure that the platform you're choosing obviously can take in that third-party feed, and also consider any internal sources that you have that would vulnerability data, for example, or results of investigations and those types of things. How big is your security staff? Before you choose a tool, make sure that you've got the staff required to handle a tool of the scope and scale. Don't buy more tool than you need. Some platforms are made for really large enterprise scale and may not scale down really well for a smaller security team. So really, keep that into consideration. The more complex the tool, typically the more mature the staff needs to be, and maybe even the staff needs to be larger in order to take full advantage of what you're buying. And then look at the maturity level of your team. How mature is your team in terms of what are you doing from a security standpoint? Are you only wanting to respond to alerts? Do you have a threat hunting team? If you have a threat hunting team, what type of investigative skills do they have? Does the tool you're choosing make the best use of the team that you've got in place and the skill set of your team? So we've talked a lot about security analytics, what it is, what it can do. So let's talk a little bit about how a tool like this or a technology like this can help to improve security operations. most of the people that I talk to and most of the SOCs that I've been in and most of the security analysts that I talk to have a very important security tool, or security productivity tool, I should say, that they use on a daily basis. And that tool is our good friend Excel. Why is that? Because we use Excel to pull in data from all of our multiple tools, and we get it all into one place so we can look at it in a single place. So that becomes our visibility tool. And then after it becomes our visibility tool, now it's our workflow tool. And how do we use it in workflow? Well, that's easy. We attach it to an email and we send it to the next analyst. So the next analyst gets the Excel spreadsheet. And then we put the alert data in there and we mark it off that we've taken care of this alert, and that's all done in Excel, which is not exactly the easiest thing to do. It's not the easiest way to keep track of information. You're requiring the analyst to go into 2 or 3 security applications perhaps, then put the data into Excel, and then track the investigation or the remediation effort in Excel, and then send that via email, which is not really a useful workflow tool, honestly. It's a communication tool, not more so than a workflow tool, and then pass all of this around. What does that kind of result in? Well, the results in we swivel chair between all of these things. And so we waste a lot of time or use a lot of analyst time moving from one thing to another instead of having that information in one place, getting that visibility, trying to understand, getting the full context of an alert in one place. And now we know how to proceed with an investigation or a remediation effort. Or even to say, hey, this is not a real alert, we can just go ahead and bypass this. So we need to organize our tools. Now, much to my wife's chagrin, this is sort of what my workshop area in our garage looks like. This is not our garage, by the way. If this actually was our garage, my wife probably would have thrown me out, put me on the street quite a long time ago, because she's a neat freak and is very organized as opposed to me. So if you look at this workshop and you're going to go in and try to get some work done, how on earth could you even figure out what tool to pick up, much less how do I find some clean space so I can go and conduct the work, right? Contrast that with a very, very orderly workspace. This actually looks like a workspace my wife would come in and go, wow, I think I could live here. We have to think about our security tools in a like fashion. Instead of thinking of them, hey, we've got 20 or 30 different tools that we're going to pull stuff together and put it in Excel, let's get those tools together in one place, or at least get the information that those tools provide us, get that into one place so we can visualize it and then work with that information. So one of the things that security analytics helps us do, based on all of being able to look at all of these different types of applications, security devices, network devices, etc., it gets us all in one place. So now we can work with the data. So it enables us to look at an alert and then act on the alert. It helps us to pull together, because we've got a contextualized alert, we've got that event correlated for us. We can look at what devices were involved and then make decisions on how we're going to go about our next steps in our investigation process. So that helps enable our incident response, and it accelerates that incident response because we're not going to multiple places, sending around spreadsheets all over the place. Then it also can enable threat hunting. As we're writing a new analytic, if we have a threat hunting team, we've got our logs stored. We want to apply that analytic to those stored logs to see if that analytic now trips because we've seen something. Now we've got that information there, gathered in our log. We've got a new analytic. We can go apply that and then go look to see, hey, have we ever seen this before? And if we saw it before, what did it do? And how do we need to address whatever this particular piece of malware or particular event is doing. And eventually what we're looking for, things like security analytics and good security process to do, is help us to automate response. This is from a report called Rules of Engagement from Forrester. It's a report that we just updated. But the thought process here is we need to get our processes together and our policies together to start thinking about how do we start automating some of the things that we do in security operations. And a key part of that automation process is having good analytics. Why is that part of it? Because we have to have good confidence that what we are seeing is a real security incident. We got to make a quick, good decision, because as our attack confidence goes up, now we can apply policy to say, hey, if our risk level is X and our confidence level is Y, do we take an automated action based on that, or do we put that into an analyst queue for follow-up? Because what we're seeing is the business is pushing us as security people to react quicker to things that are coming into our security operations, right? So if we have high confidence based on our analytics and we have a high risk, then we may decide to take an automated action and then have the analyst follow up after the automated action is taken. If the confidence is low and the risk is low, then perhaps we send that to an analyst queue to have the analyst investigate, hey, is this real or not? Is this something we need to be concerned about? And then we measure that, right? We measure and report on that. How is it doing? And automation is something we've been very reluctant to do as security people, but as our analytics improve and our policies and procedures improve, it's something we can do to help better operationalize ourselves. Okay, just a few items here to wrap up. As we discussed, we're currently overwhelmed in our security operations. We've got more alerts and more data than we know what to really do with, and our current tools don't really enable efficient processes. Security analytics can help us make better decisions and give us visibility, not only to the perimeter where we've typically and historically as security people been very comfortable operating, but all the way down to the endpoint and application level. Being able to make quicker decisions and make our processes more efficient allows us to react faster, because we're not going to get more people. We've got more technology than we could possibly even use at this point. So what we've got to do is be able to better use those people and better use that technology. Then lastly, we've got to start setting the stage for automation. We have to start thinking about it and embracing it as security people and not being afraid of it. And the only way to do that is to have good policy about what is important to us from a risk standpoint. Implementing security analytics in a way so we're making those fast, good decisions. We're confident in what our analytics are telling us so we can make those automated decisions. And then passing that on to the analyst to make sure that what we're seeing and what we're reacting to is accurate. And all that automation requires better threat intelligence, better policies so that we're reacting to the right thing, and good processes in our security operations centers. And with that, I'll wrap up here and hand it over to Ravi.
Thank you, Joseph. That was a great presentation on defining security analytics, the evolution, the considerations to use security analytics, and how can it help security operations. I think it was fantastic. And I have not seen Airplane 2. I am going to see it now after your cue for that. In the second part, I'm going to take it to one level below, where I'm going to talk about specific applications of security analytics technology, walk through some of the use cases and with the product live, so we can see how it is used in practice. Some of the scenarios that Joseph has highlighted here. So first, let's begin with the premise that, as Joseph called out earlier, that the primary purpose of security analytics is visibility. And if you really zoom into that need for visibility, I think nowadays that visibility is often a challenge when it comes to inside the organization or within the perimeter of the organization. Many security teams have this goal that we need to have eyes inside our own organization, understand what is happening within my perimeter. So an infiltration or a perimeter breach does not lead or cause a major data loss or integrity compromise to the business. And between these two, this initial breach to the final mission being accomplished, there is time, often minutes, hours, and in some cases we have seen them go up to weeks. It's also called the attacker dwell time, and teams are now focused on reducing that dwell time. And if we ask the question around exactly what is it that we want visibility into inside the organization, we can break it down into 4 different high-level classified activities, right? These are from the perspective of attack progress and activities an attacker might be involved in. And these 4 stages are first, nowadays it's all clearly known to many security teams based on recent breaches that often compromised credentials are involved in a security breach. So one of the big visibility item is to identify credentials that are being used, credentials that are being abused or misused, and credentials that are compromised. So there's one aspect around getting this visibility around the user authentication and access activity. The second is communication patterns. Contrary to legacy security where we were heavily focused on inbound communications, now security teams are realizing the value in monitoring outbound communications and identifying malicious communications as they're leaving the organization. So that's the second aspect. Third is activities on the endpoint itself. Identifying persistence and hygiene on the endpoint to highlight any unusual changes or behaviors that are occurring local to the device itself. And finally, movement of actors or activities within the organization, often called as a lateral network movement. So when we really think of visibility inside the organization, we can break it down into these 4 categories of visibility for us. Too often, this is done using what Joseph highlighted, using a spreadsheet or a swivel chair. Poor security ops or incident response teams are trying to connect 10, 20 different systems and the data sources together to identify that inside the network activity. And the challenge there is most of these existing platforms or products are reliant on rules and thresholds that are configured or pre-decided by expert security teams. And so they're at best knowing what they already know to look for, but often miss some of these behaviors and activities that otherwise cannot be seen with rules and thresholds. Second biggest challenge is this siloed view, where swivel chair activity, where analysts have to go to different systems because they don't talk to each other, and the burden is on the human analyst trying to piece this puzzle together. And the heavy reliance on manual analysis, where the initial remediation may be focused on a specific asset or a device cleanup, but the extent of the damage is often not seen, and that relies on expert security operations person or advanced security analyst to really hunt for activity that is beyond just the malware infection or virus infection. So these are some of the challenges that currently are faced by ops teams, and those are the challenges that security analytics products can help overcome. And I'll talk about each of those, how would we go about doing it. First is augmenting our rule and threshold-based systems with additional techniques like behavioral learning and analytics, where the premise here is we may not always know exactly what to look for, or nor do we know what threshold or what policy is applied to each individual or each asset. So we have to find an alternate way to do this. And here, the alternate is algorithmic learning of behaviors of users and devices, get a clear understanding of what is normal activity for these devices and users, using that normal profile to identify abnormal or unusual activities and classify them into threats to promote an anomaly into a threat with context. Taking one level into behavior learning is behaviors can be understood in multiple dimensions. So technologies like E8, for example, has a learning engine that can identify different types of behaviors based on the incoming data sources that the engine looks at. These behaviors could be newly observed behaviors, that is, a behavior that is seen for the first time for an end user or an asset or a network traffic activity. That is different when we think of behaviors that are changing from an established baseline. So it's deviating towards an unusual activity or abnormal activity. Rare behaviors compared to peer groups is what we call outliers, and patterns of behaviors like automated activity not generated by a human. And the last one is around coordinated or sequences of behavior patterns that we see. So the point here is when we think of behavioral learning, it's usually not one-dimensional behavior. There are numerous types of behaviors that have to be understood, and engines like E8 can highlight these behaviors from incoming data without writing a rule or a threshold. So this is the first step in overcoming the first challenge, that is, how can I not exclusively rely on rules and thresholds and instead use behavioral learning. Second challenge we highlighted was manual analysis. Behavioral analytics or security analytics is complementary to existing security products. These should not be seen as a rip and replace of current tools. We see this as to truly understand enterprise or an entity behavior. Existing security events are providing valuable information like IDS events, antivirus events, malware events, and so on. And properties of these users and devices gives us context about what is this user or what is this device. Now, when we complement them with behaviors that are anomalies or threats, now I have a comprehensive picture of a user or a device, both current and historical activity. This helps me overcome this dependence on experts to put this puzzle piece together. Instead, I have now all information that I need for a user or device at my fingertips without having to swivel chair and look at all information to enable a decision for me quickly. Third challenge that we highlighted was breaking down this siloed view. Behavioral analytics, security analytics can be applied to many different areas in security. We can apply this just for endpoint, or we can apply it just for network traffic, or just for user activity. I think a comprehensive and integrated security analytics platforms are the right platforms for eventually solving this goal that we set out to. So this is the reason why we think it's important to integrate user activities with network activities and endpoint activities all together into one platform, a platform that can discover the organization, learn the behaviors and activities, detect unusual activity, and prescribe an action or prescribe the decision for the analyst. So integrated security analytics, I think, are essential in breaking down these silos for us. This is technologies like E8 are here to solve this challenge by breaking down these silos, overcoming this manual analysis, and applying complex and sophisticated algorithms to simplify security, where instead of going through multiple data sources, technologies like E8 can provide a risk score for a single user based on multiple events and behaviors and anomalies that are seen or a device, and give a temporal visualizations like current and past behaviors and anomalies events all in one place. So it's all enabled for faster decision making and faster action for ops and hunting teams. Let's see how it might be seen in action. So these are some of the actual use cases that we took out to present. So first is a daily activity report. products like E8 that can summarize what happened in the last 24 hours for an organization, where it highlights high-risk users and high-risk hosts based on their current and past behaviors, and clearly differentiates between anomalous activities and threats, because not all anomalies require immediate attention, so technologies can clearly differentiate those. Let's investigate one of them. So an investigation may be triggered by an email alert or an event that gets forwarded from E8 to a workflow engine. And let's say I am a security analyst and I got this email saying that, hey, user X has a risky behavior that E8 has just alerted on. So I click on investigating the entity, and it brings me into what I call an investigator screen. This is a workbench for an analyst, so all the pertinent information is available in one place. Let's look at some of those data points that we have here. First is the context of that entity that is involved in a particular incident. This is around what do I know about that user or a device. Information like IP addresses, asset names, locations, user profiles, user IDs, and so on, all available in one place. So I'm not going around trying to figure out who used this IP address, what is the host name of this user, did this user come from this location. All of these questions are what I call low-level activity that often takes a lot of time by analysts, but that all should be presented in one place. Second is what is the unusual activity for which I am alerted. In this case, this is a behavior anomaly of a user accessing a resource that is unusual for the user to access. And this is not based on a rule that someone wrote, nor is it based on a threshold that someone has configured. Instead, algorithms learned that for this user, this activity is unusual based on historical behavior and unusual among the peers that user usually authenticates and accesses to. And technologies like E8 can clearly identify what, when, and how it happened. And at this point, the alert is detected or the incident is detected and the user has the pertinent information to take some action. The likely next action for the analyst is to start looking at what else has happened to this user. I'm sort of moving into an incident triage or hunting mode. So let's go into the next place. Before we do that, first is the analyst wants to see the actual events that contributed to a particular event. So the ability to view detailed log files that contributed to event is an important function where technologies like E8 have indexed those logs and present the detailed data for each incident appropriately. So now I not only know what behavior has happened, but I can also see the events that are indexed and presented to me in one place. Again, we're trying to overcome that swivel chair effect here. So we have the search engine built and the behavior anomaly integrated into it. Then let's see what else happened. So now I'm moving into hunting or instant triage mode, where I want to know what did the user do before and after this particular incident, and is there any suspicious behavior for that user that I'm not aware of. So in this case, we see that yes, this particular user not only tried to access a new resource, but now I'm seeing that there is excessive authentication activity using admin credentials, which looks suspicious based on this time series view that I can see. A quick visualization tells me that there is in fact a deviation from the normal trend. I can go back into investigator. Now I know that the user has done something unusual. I want to now hunt for other activities that is involved, that this user is involved in. So I'm expanding my time horizon. So I want to change the timeline from 1 day to maybe the entire week to see what else happened for this user. So simple date selections give me the time range. So I can see that there are several other incidents that are behaviors that are also involving this user or the user's asset. This gives me a different picture instead of a siloed one-time incident. If I see these behaviors may be interconnected, let's go deep dive or zoom into that. So what are we seeing here? We see that in the 2 days, the time horizon that I looked at, February 15th and 16th are the 2 days where some activity is observed. And we see these are behaviors from multiple layers of the infrastructure. I see some of them are endpoint related activities, some of them are credential misuse, some are network activity, and some are threat intel based activity. So I have one place now I'm able to see all activity that is of interest to me available with this analytics console. It's going to some of these. Right? For example, if I want to see what is this first event that triggered all of this, and I zoom in and I can see that this is an endpoint anomaly that E8 engine has detected, where an MD5 was observed as newly entering that particular endpoint, and our integration into third-party threat intel proves that this is in fact a malware that was present on the device and observed on the day. Second, we see that there is some network activity, command and control activity on both of these days. We see that this is a CNC behavior. Again, E8 algorithms were able to model the network traffic and identify that there is a C2 type communications that were originating from this device. We can zoom inside this particular CNC behavior and actually see the raw log files that contributed to the event. Naturally, analysts wants to understand what were the user agents, what were the communication patterns, what were denied or allowed by my firewall or proxy, and so on. So we have all of this information available in one place. And I also see that the firewalls in this particular instance have raised an alert both of these days, highlighting that there is a spyware phone home detection detected. Now, if I did not have an analytics platform, each of these alerts would be one among thousands, and they're not connected to each other. And without behavioral anomaly, I would have not gotten the first alert that I got about user behavior that initiated this particular hunting activity for me. So this gives a clear story of, in 5 minutes, I'm able to put together multiple incidents into a single story. I'm able to understand how a user behavior, when looked back in time, originated from a malware with a CNC and user credentials activity, all related to one incident. So it gives me information to take decisions very quickly. I can block the user or quarantine the user ID. I can update my proxy policies to block that CNC activity that I've seen. I can update my sandboxes or alerts and look for other hosts that are involved with that MD5 that is known malware that entered my organization. All of them in about 5 to 10 clicks without using the spreadsheets, without moving around multiple tools. This is what we mean by productivity of the analysts is improved orders of magnitude without relying on experts to do this kind of work. That's what technologies like security analytics and behavioral analytics enable. This is existing data sources. This data you may be collecting already in your organization, but they are not talking to each other. Analytics platforms helps you take all the data, put it in one place, and apply data normalization, data storage, data collection, relationship analysis, entity fusion, and behaviors and threat detection all in one place. These systems can be used to send these as alerts via SMTP, emails, or SIMs, or it's used by interactive operations and hunting teams, as I've shown in the last slides. So think of E8 and security analytics as a tool or a technology that can help detect this anomalous activity and provide you the visibility that you need and overcome this reliance on rules and thresholds first. But think of these technologies also as enabling incident triage and incident response, where you're not focused on a single incident. Instead, E8 can enable you to understand the comprehensive story behind a single incident that you're investigating. And the same platforms can be used for hunting teams for advanced activities like patterns and multiple incidents that are related and proliferating in the organization. So that's how E8 can help, and how we think security analytics will really move the needle forward for security teams.
Great. Thank you so much, Ravi and Joseph. That was great content, a lot of really, really good information. So to learn more, before we go into our questions and answers, we have two takeaways for you to learn a little bit more about what was discussed today. Forrester recently released the vendor landscape for security user behavior analytics. You can access that report. It's made available in the link section of this webinar. In addition, you can go to e8security.com/Forrester report and download it there. We also have another white paper available to you. It's a case study for preventing security threats. This is a unified view of the things you need to think about when implementing a security analytics platform. As Ravi and Joseph both said, this isn't an or strategy. It isn't a rip and replace. So these are some best practices and use cases you can use when thinking about this technology in your organization. And you can, again, download that white paper from e8security.com, detect, hunt, respond. So let's go into some questions. Looks like we've got quite a few here. So let's see. All right, I think this one is for you, Joseph. So how is security analytics different from UBA, which is a very popular acronym nowadays?
That is a good question. Or, SUBA or UEBA, or
Exactly.
I think you can spell the same thing any number of ways. The way that we look at security analytics in UBA at Forrester, UBA is part of security analytics. If you look at analytics as a whole, and go back to one of the slides that I shared during my presentation, UBA and kind of the focus on the user is definitely an important piece, but it's a piece of security analytics as a whole. So if you look at the ability to look at user behavior or entity behavior, device behavior inside of an environment, you also have to consider, how does that user, move about the network. So that's why we don't look at UBA in isolation. We look at it as, hey, not only do we have to understand the user, we also have to understand the network infrastructure that the user is taking advantage of, as well as the devices housing data or cloud environments housing data or applications.
Great. We have another one here. I think it could be both of you could answer this question, so I'll leave it to you to decide who goes first. But is SIM part of security analytics?
Joseph, you want to take the first shot?
Ravi, do you want to take that one?
I could. So my view here is SIM has a place in the enterprise infrastructure today, where use cases like compliance-driven use cases and well-known thresholds, policies, rules that we create to comply, like specific regulatory needs or internal organizations compliance around security and risk management. I think there is a place, and they're really effective in what they do. I think technologies like E8 and other security analytics tools today are complementary, and together they can solve the problems for many security operations teams. I see them as complementary to each other. I don't necessarily think one is part of the other. Maybe in the future they will merge and they will evolve into a single platform. But at the moment they're complementary and feed off each other.
Yeah, Robbie, I'd have to add to that. What we've seen a lot of the SIMs do is build, the analytic layer on top. So they're either working in conjunction of someone like yourselves at E8, or they're building an analytic layer themselves on top. So there's definitely an element where they exist side by side. And for what it's worth, in our coverage, we include SIM as part of our analytics coverage for the two big reasons, right? One, We see them, adding the analytics layer or working with analytics vendors, and also in many cases, our clients are using SIMS as a log aggregator, if nothing else, and then adding some sort of analytic technology on top of it.
Perfect. So, Robbie, this one is for you. It's how many data sources does E8 require to do behavioral analytics?
So E8 has coverage for multiple types of data sources. Some of those classifications are like user authentication and access activity, network activity, and endpoint activity. And there are different data sources within each of these categories that provides us the visibility that we need to apply our algorithms and models. However, the customers can choose specifically which data sources they want E8 to analyze, and that is dependent on the specific use case or the problem set that the customers are trying to solve. Ideally, the platform can do all of these, and when you add multiple data sources, it gives you comprehensive visibility. So you're not siloed again within E8. If your problem you're trying to solve is break down the silos, connect my user activity with my network traffic and endpoint, then we'll need all of those. But customers can choose to begin with a very small scope with one or two data sets and solve point needs first before they evolve into a full platform. We are flexible.
Great. Thank you. Joseph, this one is for you. What are you hearing from customers? If security analytics is provides alerting, where is that, and how does that cause false positives for security operations teams? What feedback are you seeing and hearing?
For the most part, we're actually seeing that our customers are looking for analytics tools to help reduce false positives. That and to help them get away from having different technologies send the same alert 2 or 3 different ways, and get that down to where it's a single event as opposed to several different alerts. With our customers, they're really looking at these technologies to help them improve the intelligence that they get from their environment.
Great. I have a question from the audience. Jay, thank you for the question. The question is, how much time is typically required for the engine to learn the user environment, and how are false positives addressed? There are 2 parts to this question. First is, for all self-learning engines like E8, for audience to think about, there is a training period, which we call the learning period, where E8 is learning an environment, discovering the environment, and training its algorithms. And then there is a scoring period. Scoring is where the incoming data is scored for anomalies or threats. The learning period or the training period, typically we ask for 2 weeks as a minimum time. So we have a full range of business hours, business days activity, and the weekend activity that we can observe and the algorithms can learn. The more, the better. This is how it works usually for learning periods. The default is 2. Often we see 2 to 4 weeks is the ideal time when these scores are normalized, and then there comes a point where it's a diminishing returns. The more data you throw at it, the return is not exactly a linear scale. So my recommendation to most of our customers would be start with 2 weeks. That should get you started. And if you can add 3 or 4 weeks, it'll make it even better. But 2 weeks get you started. The second is how are false positives addressed? So the important thing here is analytics is technology that can provide you intelligence and insights into what is happening inside your organization. Now, some of these anomalies are classified into threats based on different events that are seen or observed together, and contextual analysis which is done. In that case, E8 classifies them as threats, and there is a risk score assigned to a particular threat. The higher the score is, the more severe or critical that particular threat is. We also see that many of these anomaly signals are not always threats, but they are useful when you're hunting or when you're doing incident triage, particularly retrospective analysis, historical analysis. These low-score anomalies are also useful in identifying what changed about this behavior, not necessarily if it is a threat or not. So false positives are addressed based on our risk ranking and threat modeling, but anomalies are useful at the same time.
Robbie, I have another question for you that came in. Do you use outside threat intelligence feeds?
Yes. So yes, and then extension to the answer is unlike traditional tools that use threat intel feeds as the primary means to detect an activity, where they're scanning log files or data sets to see if there is a hit of a known threat intel like an IP address or a malware binary. What E8 does is E8 uses that as a context to an anomaly that it has seen. So, for example, if E8 models an outbound CNC traffic, it will cross-check that if that domain is already known in a threat intel or a binary is seen, but it does not exclusively rely on threat intel feeds as a primary means to detect events. It uses it as a context and reputation.
Great. Joseph, I have one that came in for you. It says, how do I know if I'm ready to move to a security analytics solution?
I think it kind of depends on where you are on your in your security maturity. You know, when we look at different organizations, different companies, you know, one of the things we want to look at is how mature are they in terms of their security process and operations. If you're not using any monitoring technology at all, then security analytics is probably a place where you could start investigating, you know, how do I start monitoring what's happening in my environment and actually looking for threats. If you are using another monitoring solution and it's not meeting your needs, I think that's another opportunity you have for, you know, saying, is there something else that could better meet the needs? Could a security analytics platform like an E8 or others, obviously, could this help solve the problem that I've got in terms of why I'm dissatisfied with my current situation, whether that's a SIM or some other kind of monitoring technology? Definitely worth kind of investigating some of the newer tools that are out there.
Wonderful. Well, that is all the time we have. For those of you who submitted questions and we didn't have a chance to respond, we will follow up with you, so thank you for that. Again, just want to call out that to learn more, download a unified case study for preventing unknown threats and the vendor landscape security user behavior analytics report, both available on e8security.com. Thank you again for our special guest, Joseph. It was wonderful to have you on, and Robbie for your time as well. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us this morning. Take care.
Thank you.